So what I'm going to talk about today is getting started with Azure Integration Services. And as Lex mentioned, my name is Stephen Thomas. Let's start a little bit about me first, in case you haven't seen me talk in the past. I am an independent consultant. I've been working for myself for about the past 20 years now, solely focused on Microsoft-based integration solutions. I've been working with BizTalk server since it first came out. Just hit my 23rd anniversary, I think, of working with BizTalk. So it's been quite a while. I've been working with Azure services such as Service Bus and virtual machines since they first came out about 12 years ago. And of course, working with Logic Apps since we first saw them out about 6 years ago as well. And as mentioned, I am a Azure MVP, and I've been an MVP for 18 years in a row now. If you want to learn more about anything you see here and other Azure information, I have a site on my website, stephenwthomas.com/learn. And I'm going to keep this updated kind of on a weekly basis with new information that might be relevant. Right now I have links to some relevant Pluralsight courses, as well as some outside resources that you might find useful. You can also email me anytime at stephen@stephenwthomas.com. Or, of course, follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. So I was looking back at some past sessions that I've done at some of the other Integrate conferences. I think this is my 11th conference. I think I've done them all. I missed one here in London, but they had a US equivalent, so I was able to do it there. And I looked back, and my session in 2015 was the top 14 integration challenges I've seen in the past 14 years. And I looked back, and wow, our challenges have changed in those 9 years since I gave that session. Life's a lot easier now for us than it was back then. Then I saw 3 years later, I gave a session that somehow incorporated making BizTalk Server great again. Not sure how that campaign went, but here we are. That was actually 5 years ago today to the date, because it popped up on my Facebook feed this morning of me standing at the same podium at a different venue giving that session. For those of you that weren't there, they had a doodler in the audience who would doodle everyone's session, which was really cool. So they would draw the speaker, and they would draw key information about the speaker, like shapes and words and stuff like that. And they drew my speaker avatar correct with the belly and no hair. I'm like, could you at least put some hair on the guy? But it did not happen that way. So I always like to talk about market trends. Since I work for myself, I talk to a lot of recruiters. I like to talk to a lot of clients as well. And of course, it's probably no big surprise. Over the past year, I've seen a huge decrease in the demand for BizTalk resources. At the same time, I have seen the few recs out there have had really, really good rates. So there is still demand for some clients looking for BizTalk resources. I've also seen a huge uptick of Azure integration architects, which to me signals that clients are starting to look at what are their overall integration needs and how's the cloud going to play a role in that. So the rates on these roles have kind of been mixed. Some have been trying to get cheaper resources, some have been good jobs. But just recently I've seen a huge uptick in Logic App resources. The clients are wanting specific people to build Logic Apps and help them do net new development in Azure. That's not necessarily a migration of BizTalk server. So I find that as an encouraging trend for all of us. So as I wrote this session, I kind of was looking at two different scenarios that would fit into this session. First off would be people doing BizTalk migrations to Azure Integration Services. And next would be people doing net new integration solutions. Now, this session isn't necessarily going to be a technical session. I'm not going to show you how to actually do Azure Integration Services. It's more focused on the strategy side of things, like why do we care and why we should care about using Azure Integration Services, and then how we can get our clients to help leverage them as well. Are there people here that fit into these two buckets that aren't using Azure Integration Services today? A couple people, good. So it fits a few people here. So our agenda, it's very simple. We're going to talk about why, how, and what. So straightforward. So why? So why should we care about Azure Integration Services? So since I've started my development career like 23 years ago, it's always the business resources are always seemed out to get the developers. Most of the time we're cost centers, and businesses want to make as much money as possible. So they want us as developers to do the most work we can with the least resources possible in terms of like delivering project work. So the first risk that I saw when I started my development career was Y2K. It initially started with a lot of work for us, but then the thinking was, well, all the computers would shut down, society would stop functioning, and we'd all be out of work. That really didn't happen. We didn't really see that come true, thankfully. But then the next big impact to us was outsourcing. There was a big uptick a few years right after Y2K, where a lot of us had to change positions and start working on different types of coding projects. If we were in the industry 15 years ago, I'm sure you or someone you know was probably impacted by outsourcing. We were kind of lucky, though, as integration resources, because the integration projects really didn't outsource very well. So we were pretty lucky that most of the time we still had our on project resources for integration, because we had to deal with business and multiple systems, and it was tough. And now, of course, we see AI. And I don't think anyone can question the fact that AI is going to have an impact on everything we do in the near future. I don't know about anybody else, but recently when I do development, I have a window open next to me with ChatGPT open. And when I have a question, I just simply type it in, and it'll give me an answer. And it definitely has increased my productivity. So I went ahead and asked, I want a class in C# that does, remove special characters from a string, does XML encoding, and then formats it in base64. And this is something I would generally do on a client project, and maybe do it once or twice a year. So not enough to memorize how to do it, but enough to understand what the code should look like. And then, of course, just a few seconds later, what do we see? The code complete with a copy me button, and I can copy it and leverage this code. Now, I could have got the same information in Google and looking at forum posts, but this centralized it all in one spot in a matter of moments. So if I was a C# developer, I'd be pretty concerned. I mean, this is really going to be an impact on everything we do. But I'm lucky that, I don't really consider myself a developer. And for many sessions I've been up here, I consider myself a drag and drop developer. So, and this comes with some pluses. I've never been more excited than right now today to be a drag and drop developer. And I think my next slide will be probably one of the most important you see at this whole conference, at least I think it is. So I asked, the AI robot to build me a logic app, and it can't do it. So to me, that means we have good job security. So, and what this further feeds into is that, integration in itself is challenging, and us as integrators are in a very good spot to be able to, build these solutions, leverage multiple components in Azure, and, we don't have to worry necessarily so much about the AI impact. And we'll definitely be able to do our job better and more efficient, but I don't think we'll be able to be replaced, at least for some time. And then add the yet. I'm sure it'll get there eventually. So why is now the right time to be thinking about Azure Integration Services? It sounds like most of you have Azure Integration Services running now. But if you don't, there's some reasons why now makes the most sense to get started. So last year I asked a Azure developer with no BizTalk experience this simple question. How excited are you to jump in and start learning BizTalk? Is that gentleman here today? By any chance? No. And his exact response was not very excited. So it wasn't a big shock. So ultimately, I think there's very little we could probably get 90% of this room to agree on, but this is probably one of them. That never in the world will we have more BizTalk experience than we have today. So that means people are starting to move out of BizTalk, focus on other areas. New people coming out of college, they're definitely not focusing on BizTalk Server. So if you're looking at moving away from BizTalk, migrating out of BizTalk, now is definitely the right time. Top that off with likely your company and your clients are losing domain knowledge every day. So people are shifting projects, people are retiring, people are even moving on to other companies, and they walk out the door, you lose all that domain knowledge. I got a call just a few weeks ago from a VP that I'd helped migrate to BizTalk 2020. And he had just merged with another group, and he said, we have this BizTalk server running here. Nobody knows what it does. He's like, this developer told me it's still under support, but I don't have to worry about it. He said, I think it's BizTalk 2009. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to be under support anymore. But the point being is they missed their window of being able to do something with this environment with people that know what it was supposed to do. So now we have to start from scratch and take a look at it from there. So even if you don't have on-premise integration today, now's still the right time to look at Azure Integration Services because you want to build out your strategy. So one of the clients I work with today, essentially I work for the corporate IT, and they have different departments that each have their own IT division. Well, one of them is looking at bringing in a new software package that runs on a competing cloud provider. So now they're all excited about leveraging this new cloud provider to do all of their cloud work. When us at corporate are like, well, that's not our vision. That's not where we're going to go. And we haven't really communicated that out yet. So the sooner you can build a vision and have a future and share it with your company, company-wide, and get people to buy into that vision, the easier it's going to be for you to ensure that we're going down the right path. So now let's talk about the how. And this is totally my interpretation of how we came up with this concept of Azure Integration Services, because it didn't always exist. There used to just kind of be logic apps and service bus and stuff like that. So how did we come up with this concept? Well, this is something else you'll never see, is BizTalk and easy in the same sentence. So, and if you look back, BizTalk was relatively easy to sell. When I was at clients, it would be a smaller part of a larger project generally. But your clients are Microsoft-based, they got SQL Server already, and they need this mission-critical integration to send orders or download flat files, and BizTalk made a lot of sense. Now, it might not have been easy to develop and hard to administer, but it was relatively easy to get in the door. And it was easy to understand that you paid X, you paid one set of money, and you got Y. So you paid a yearly fee for maintenance if you wanted it, and you knew exactly what you were getting out of the box. So it was simple. And then I would talk to those same clients, we're talking about 5 years ago, about Azure integration. And all they would talk to me about is all the fees. And I don't blame them because it's still complex. You have one pricing for Service Bus, you have Logic App Consumption, you have different pricing for Logic App Standard, more pricing for APIM, and I'll stop there, but I could go on and on and on. So this made the conversation, rather than focusing on the technology solution, most people got fixated on the billing, which, we've gotten a little more sophisticated with adoption of cloud in general, so this isn't as much of an issue as it was, but it was definitely a problem back in the day. So then I would have to explain to them, well, you pay X, Y, and sometimes Z. This changes every single month. You get a whole host of services and features, and they change constantly. You get new features almost every month. It's great. But you really only care about a few of those. So it was just a hard story to sell. And even if it saved the money, and I could say it's going to save you 20%, or it's going to be 20% of the cost, it was still a challenge. My first Logic App solution that I ever built, 6 years ago, even before integration accounts were available, it's still running in production today. It does hundreds of thousands of dollars of billing every single month. And last I checked, their bill was $37. And that's a pretty good return of investment on that. I mean, BizTalk was significantly more than that. So it was a challenge on how to present this. So that gives us to the what. How do we get to the what of Azure Integration Services? So I looked at Microsoft's website and did a search for Azure Integration Services, and then they summed it up pretty good. And it's to build new integrated solutions that connect applications and services on-prem and in the cloud. And wow, that sounds really cool. I mean, I could buy that. That sounds good. It brings business workflows together so they're scalable and consistent. Everybody likes that. And then lastly, allows you to expose your APIs for developers and create opportunities for new business models. Wow, I want to buy that. I can sell that. That's easier than saying, well, we're going to piece together Service Bus and Logic Apps and throw APIM on top. And now I can just say, we're going to do Azure Integration Services. And really, at the end of the day, it's a marketing bundle, right? So they're marketing all these different solutions together and allow us to present it as one single piece of effort and work that's very understandable and easy to follow. And I'll tell you what, it helps a lot. No longer are my conversations focused on the billing side of things. It's now, wow, what services are we going to use from Azure Integration Services to go forward and build our integration vision? So just this simple bit of marketing effort has really paid off tremendously. So we saw on the earlier slide of kind of what components Microsoft puts in this space. I'll just cover them quickly. Logic Apps, Service Bus, API Management, Event Grid, Azure Functions, and Azure Data Factory. Apparently they've added a new one. Event Hub, which is good. But there's a few other things too I want to make sure people don't forget about when they're building a solution. We have integration accounts. People either love them or hate them, mostly hate them. But we got some new features coming with this, so it'll be better. There's WCF Relay, which we can't forget about our legacy WCF systems that might be running on premise. That's where WCF Relay comes into play. Blob Storage, of course. Key Vault, I think ever since Key Vault came out, every single solution I've built leverages Key Vault. And then I want to put a special shout out for the on-premises data gateway, which I feel is definitely the most undervalued, probably Azure service out there. It is, if you don't know what it does, it allows you to connect Azure to your on-premise systems. It supports about 15 or so systems out of the box. Things like SQL, SAP, really amazing technology, what it does. And it's actually almost been out for 7 years now. It's also heavily leveraged by the Power BI team, which means there's almost monthly updates to the gateway, which is good as well. So there's that. So what does all this do for you? What's this marketing bundle help us with? As I mentioned, helps us make it easier to talk about, easier to understand, and ultimately easier to sell Azure Integration Services. And even if we're not selling it to a client, we're still selling it internally. I mean, we have to sell it to our boss and the decision makers and architects and convince them that this is the right vision. And we saw from that earlier presentation that Gartner's recognized them 5 times in a row as Azure Integration Services, their bundle of products, as being just remarkable. And it's up to us to help sell that and make sure that our customers see that as well. So what are really your next steps? Understand why now is the right time for Azure Integration Services. I'm sure there's at least somebody out here saying, well, last year you said was the right time to do your migration. Well, we're going to get to that point just like the guy with the 2009 BizTalk server where there's not going to be anybody left to do that migration. So now is the time. Clock's running. If you don't have a strategy focusing on Azure integration, you can think about developing that as well. Otherwise, you might risk running down another cloud provider. Knowing how to position Azure Integration Services for success, positioning it as the bundle of resources, and outline what each service you needs can fill that. But understanding what each service can do for your company. If you're a workflow service, use your Logic Apps and use Service Bus and how those can all integrate together. So there's some other important upcoming resources at this conference I want to point out. On Wednesday, Dan's giving a talk on landing safely with Azure Integration Services, talking about some of the new landing zone features that we mentioned earlier. Not something I looked at myself recently, but it's definitely worth looking at. And then June 22nd, the Logic App team is having Logic App Aviators Day, which there's about 15 or so short pre-recorded sessions. I'm doing one on getting started with standard edition Logic Apps. So if you've not worked with standard edition before, not set it up to run locally, this is the session for you. I do all that and walk you through some of the key differences. I do it all in about 25 minutes, so don't miss that session if you're interested. And then with that, if there's any questions. Okay, well, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Thank you.